So starting off with the reminder of Paccuppanna Dhamma, here and now. So this, as the Vassa ends and the different activities, people coming and going, katinas, traveling, but wherever you are, it's always Paccuppanna Dhamma, if you're on an airplane or in a monastery in Australia or England, is Paccuppanna Dhamma. So this sati is keep this in mind. Whether you're bathing or putting on your robes or in a state of misery and anguish over personal problems, it's always this reference, Paccuppanna Dhamma, that brings us, that reminds us. Or here and now. Bhutto, being the knowing, being this that knows. And so these are the challenges we have in practice, in Patipatta, is to keep using wherever we are, whoever we're with, whatever way we're feeling, being the Bhutto knowing the Dhamma rather than this person in Australia, this monk in Thailand, this nun in England or whatever. It's not, these are the conventions, but this grasp, these kind of attitudes always reinforce the Sakkaya Ditthi. And then to really examine when you operate from Sakkaya Ditthi, so you begin to see the result of operating from Sakkaya Ditthi is like this. Now, in this monastic life, just when you're suffering, when you feel disrespected or unhappy or doubtful or angry or resentful or whatever, this is the First Noble Truth. And then it's to be able to see that in terms of from this Paccuppanna Dhamma rather than seeing it in the worldly term Sakkaya Ditthi, you and me, how it should be, it's not fair, I want it to be otherwise. So Sakkaya Ditthi is the self. You create the self through grasping memories. We all have our own memories, ideas, identities. Everything, is when grasped. Then we become a person. So if we grasp like being a male or a female, then we become that way. Like one of the problems in the society is a strong sense of women's rights, and the sense of being a woman is so powerful at this time, that it becomes one's whole life is to stand up for women and to you feel like you're betraying your own gender if you're out there, standing up for women's rights. This is one example. It affects us all because it's the feeling of the time. And so it's not that it's anything wrong with it, but it is a perception. It is a condition that creates this sense of, this is what I am and I have to stand up for myself. We also have this sense of personal integrity. Our principles and our integrity, which can be based on, high standards and ideals. But it also creates a sense of me and mine, my principles, my integrity, my gender, even applying it to my tradition or my position. Whatever, this possessive pronoun my attaches to, you become, you create Sakya Ditti Silabhata Paramasa Vicikicca with it. Now the mindfulness is being aware of this. It's not that, we're condemning this or judging it, but noticing the result of being attached to conditioned phenomena is like this. Now this is, Buddho, the refuge in this knowing, this intuitive awareness. So what does it feel like to be somebody with high principles and a strong sense of rights and privileges and fairness and all the rest, duties, responsibilities, being a teacher, being senior. So then we can observe this, be the knower of this. I'm senior monk, I'm responsible, is like this. I'm a teacher of the Dhamma, so I am very responsible. And so this whole sense, and this is, it's not criticizing, it's just noticing the result of being attached to these roles or positions or concepts is like this. Now when I do that, then I do feel it brings up my karma, the sense of myself as being somebody that has to do something, has to perform, has to set an example, has to be responsible, has to be accountable, can't let the group down, got to be there, got to perform my duties. There's so much of this got to and should and must. And noticing this, what this does to your consciousness when you're caught in this sense of how things should and must and me and what I should be doing and when I can't do it, then I feel guilty, I feel worthless. When you get sick and you're kind of helpless, you can feel, at least I can, experience just this sense of, I can't perform my duties anymore. I'm letting the group down because I'm sick. Or feel, guilty. And as you get older, old people, we suffer from the fact that we can't do what we used to. Because the Sakyaditi is set when you're young, you get all, you're conditioned, your ego's conditioned while you're young. And if you never have any perspective on it, you're still stuck with this perception of yourself and cultural conditioning and duties, responsibilities, rights, ideals, principles, till it'll follow you to your grave, unless you get Alzheimer's and forget it all. But in Vipassana meditation, it's getting to the root of the problem, suffering and its causes. This is yoniso manasikara, these Pali words, getting to where it all begins. Where does this sense of me and mine begin? Where does it arise from? And so this can only be recognized through awareness. It's not about thinking or analyzing about how things should be or figuring it out, the method or the technique, but actually doing it. So it's in the here and now, the Paccuppanna Dhamma, awareness, mindfulness, where then you begin to create yourself as a separate person, a personality. You have to attach to thinking, the thinking process. So there's say at this very moment, sitting here, listening to the sound of silence, which is present here and now. Then it's like the thinking mind stops. I'm just listening, poised attention. But it's not like a kind of being lost in it, absorption in some kind of peaceful state. So it's not a kind of absorption into some object, but it's this poised attentiveness, the point of intersection between the timeless and time. Just this. And then I can create myself. I'm Ajahn Sumedho, and and I have to think I'm Ajahn Sumedho, because this pure awareness does not say anything. It's not saying you are Ajahn Sumedho. In order to become Ajahn Sumedho, I have to start thinking I'm Ajahn Sumedho. But that's why establishing this sense of presence, pure presence, so you recognize it, you know it. And then you can come from that pure presence, the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned, where you can see the created, the born, the conditioned. Because the self is created, born, it's conditioned. So this pure presence is empty, so you can call it shunyata or emptiness. It's anatta, non-self, because it's not personal. It's non-judgmental. It's not saying how things should or shouldn't be. But it is intelligent. It's a direct knowing. It's intuition. It's discerning. And so like the discerning part is, say, contrast the word discern with discrimination. The English word discrimination. Now that is about thinking. Discrimination is saying this is bigger, smaller, better, worse, yellow, blue, male, female. That's discrimination. And that's the thinking process, and identity with conditioned phenomena. So when we don't have this discerning ability, when we forget that, then we're caught in our discrimination, which always alienates us Because there's always an opposite to whatever you think you are. You always have its opposite to deal with. So it's like conflict and loneliness and despair and disappointment and grief, sorrow, despair, and anguish arise from this illusion of separateness, of me and mine. So discrimination is about conditioned phenomena. So it's not about the unconditioned is better than the conditioned. And that's what the thinking mind will do that, and say the unconditioned is better than the conditioned, which gives us this sense of having to kind of destroy the conditioned, and just, this idea of maybe just staying in this, I want to stay in a perpetual state of the unconditioned, is missing the whole point. You're getting, you're figuring it out on the conceptual level only, but not having any insight, not practicing, not being mindful. Maybe you understand the theory. So being this unconditioned awareness, Bhutto, seeing Dhamma the way it is using these concepts not for identity or grasping, but for reminding, remembering, discerning. So discernment then is this knowing the conditioned and the unconditioned. Now, knowing the unconditioned, then once that's, we're not used to that. We're conditioned to know about conditions. About how life should be, how this is better, worse, this is good, this is evil, this is right, and that's wrong. Moral and immoral, good and bad, friends and enemies, and on like this. This is how discrimination. And the discrimination, then, if we just operate from discrimination, then we can get the idea of the unconditioned, but we see it from conceptual terms only. We get the idea of it, in other words. But the reality of it, that takes this paccuppanna dhamma, really, yoniso manasikara, getting to the root, being aware, awake, aware is like this. So then this sound of silence is what I've used to, for this vibration. Just using that as a reference point. Not making it into anything. What is it? Is it the unconditioned? Is it consciousness? Going into endlessly trying to figure it out. You're back into that realm of discrimination again, wanting a name for it. But it is what it is. It's usable. It's practical. Because it works. So you refer to it, remember it. And then the conditions can be seen, like this sense of listening to your Sakya Ditti, getting to know it in all its various permutations, manifestations. Like just the desire, wanting. I want this, I don't want that. Why the whinging tendency? Why does life have to be like this? Why can't we all just get along? Why can't we? Why do the nuns have to be like that? Why do the monks? Why do men have to be that way? Why can't we just be nice, respect each other? And so then we listen to the kind of whinging, complaining mind. Why can't the conditioned realm be what I want it to be as an ideal? Or somebody else, you think, why does that person have to be like that? Why he should be more compassionate. He's not compassionate, he's too critical. And so we criticize, we gossip, we dwell on each other's faults or the things we don't like. And so we're lost into that samsara. So this word samsara is that, this kind of conditioned phenomena, operating, rising, ceasing, being born and dying. And you can't get any perspective on it from that level. I mean, you're just lost in this whirlpool, this vortex of changing conditions. One is just hopelessly propelled around, thrown about by the changing conditions. Just how emotionally, just observe how emotionally you can be thrown about just, in just a few seconds. Somebody says, you're the greatest Buddhist teacher that's ever lived, and then happy, and then you're snot-nosed monster, and then you feel angry, depressed. Somebody called me snot-nosed. Now that's the limit. I can't even. Monster's all right, but. Just watching, emotionally how vulnerable I am as a person. And that's where seeing that, being able to observe that, how emotional, being attached to wanting everything, wanting respect and everybody to be nice to each other and understanding and all that, then by attaching to those ideals, then we're always going to be disappointed. We've set ourselves up for disillusionment. Because it's not like that. The world is not like that. It's Yuttadhammo, this Pali word meaning conditions arise and cease according to other conditions. So you can't control that. You can't force everybody to be nice and stay that way. Because conditions sometimes are, everybody's in harmony, but that's not generally the case. There are peak moments of conditioned experience, but then if we're not aware, then that creates the desire for that all the time. I want just one peak moment after another. I want just a procession of continuous experience of peak moments. And we realize that the conditioned phenomena can't do that for us. It's just impossible for it to sustain itself at peaks, at its best. But what is sustainable is awareness, and this is like Paccuppanna Dhamma, because it's here and now all the time. It's just a matter of remembering, of recognizing. So then, once we have that as our refuge, then we can deal with the changing conditions that we're experiencing physically, good health, bad health, success, failure, good fortune, bad fortune, praise and blame, happiness, suffering. We can bear with, we've got this ability to bear with all kinds of adversity and horror. You talk to people who've been in, who've had kind of survive in prison camps or horrible situations or terrible chronic illnesses. And if they're just caught in self-pity or wishing it otherwise, they're just miserable, wretched, neurotic, screwed up individuals. Complaining and bitter because life hasn't been good to them. Or being able to find that, to recognize through this awareness, this knowing from intuitive awareness, where then we can bear with whatever our karma might bring to us. Whether it's pain, physical pain, or humiliation, misfortune, fame, or blame, or whatever. All these conditions, the conditions are bearable if we have this perspective on them. But if we don't, then we are kind of helpless victims of fate. If life goes well, we can feel very happy or secure, but then it's subject to change, unexpected change. So in the news, they had these terrible earthquakes and tsunamis in the Pacific and Sumatra, where they think 1,000, maybe several thousand people have died through just horrible underwater earthquakes which create these tidal waves. And suddenly, your daily life is suddenly you find everything washed away, and your life, all that you treasure and depend on for your sense of well-being and happiness has been suddenly removed, taken away. Well, what would that feel like? If your dependency was on having, family, job, situation, all kind of, and then you could feel happy and secure. And also, it's like a Devadutta, it's a sign, isn't it, of the danger. This realm is dangerous. It's subject to change. And changes that we can't even anticipate or think about. Like the natural catastrophes, tsunamis, earthquakes. Hurricanes, and on like that. Then there's the wars, that you hear about, in Pakistan or Afghanistan, kind of, trying to get rid of the vicious, nasty, evil forces, the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, so they send in missiles to destroy, these villains, but in the process they seem to kill everyone else but that. And it's justified, nationally justified as, and yet you think of all those people or mothers who've seen all their children killed off, what that would be like. While we're sitting here in this nice ethereal Amravati. This is going on. In Sumatra, in Afghanistan, people really faced with horror and things that are, really important to them are being destroyed. And it's not right, it's not fair. And that's the discrimination. It isn't fair, it's not right. There's no way I can say that is the right thing to do. My own sense of morality and respect for life cannot support and say that using that way is right to do. It's immoral, basically, from a Buddhist perspective. So that's discrimination. But then discernment is being able to see that in myself. How I can get myself very indignant and angry over the injustices and the brutality that I hear about through the media. And so this is like, discernment is discerning. It's like this, feeling indignant and angry. It's not discriminating against it, it's observing it. When I get indignant and angry about the injustices in the society, it's like this. And then it gives me that perspective of discerning it. It is what it is. It's not saying judging, it's merely recognizing. Feeling angry about injustice is like this. Now, if I attach to that anger and indignation, then I become an indignant, angry person. And then that indignant, angry person is how I perceive. I can spend, my life just being angry about the injustices and unfairnesses of the society, of the world around me. Being on a very kind of high horse, a righteous indignation level, which is, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is suffering when you really look at it. Being indignant about injustice is, when attached to, without recognition, without understanding, then one is quite miserable. Blaming, hating those people that are the problem, that you see as the enemy or the causes of suffering. Because that's the dualistic structure of samsara. Right, wrong, good, bad, moral, immoral. You see, so what the Buddha emphasizes is mindfulness, which brings us to a position where we have perspective on the conditions. And then through recognizing that, getting to the source, like the Third Noble Truth, the Nirodha Satya, is, that comes through seeing the causes, the suffering that one creates through grasping desires. You can't just wipe out the conditioned realm into a blank nothing. It's not sticking your head into the sand or putting a blindfold over your eyes and plugging up your ears. It's it's about discerning. And this discernment allows us to learn from experience. What is the conditions that we have to live with, the bodies that we have, the people we live with, the society we're in, the country we live in is like this. We can, so it's not, being caught in in resentment, in anger, and attachment, and when everything's going right, wanting to keep that security, everything's okay, because we recognize that conditioned phenomena is unstable. Its very nature is anicca. What offers stability is awareness. And this is like the third noble truth. Nirodha Satya is recognizing the empty, unconditioned reality. Recognizing. They call it realizing. The reality is this. This is real. This unborn, uncreated, unconditioned. This is reality. And so it's like having insight. Reality is this. This poised attentiveness in the present moment before the self arises. Or where you can get perspective, you can see the pain you're feeling or the emotional stress you might be experiencing as an object, as an aramana, rather than operating through grasping, through struggling, resistance, attachment. So this is wisdom, panya, satipanya, discerning. So knowing, discerning self from non-self, atta from anatta. Atta or self cannot, it gets totally confused by trying to understand anatta. Because the self is all about me and mine and my thought and my memories and my views and my feelings, my body, how things should and shouldn't be. So it can't have any perspective. It can't recognize anatta. Like Luang Por Chah used to say, if you think about anatta, your brain will blow up, will explode. You try to figure out anatta, just conceptually. So it's not. So we're not trying to believe that we don't have a self. If you're a Buddhist, you don't have any self, and you should believe in that. That's still self. Atta is self. But anatta is, from this awareness. This awareness then, Paccabannadhamma, is aware of the self. So I can listen to this sense of me and mine and my principles and my integrity and my view and my position, my rights. I can be aware of how much I criticize myself. I shouldn't be selfish. I should be more compassionate than I am sometimes. I shouldn't be this way or that way. Now that awareness is of that, is the anatta. That which is aware of atta is anatta. But anatta is immanent in the paccabannadhamma. It's now. It's not trying to become a non-self, but realizing this empty, poised moment and learning to trust it. Totally trust. Surrender to it. So in my own practice, I had this insight many years ago: surrender to this, trust it totally. And then, of course, over the years, I've been challenged in all kinds of ways. From the the 8 worldly dhammas, the changing conditions, where doubt and indignation and fear and jealousy and envy and disappointment and despair, cold hopes swarm like worms within this living clay. And then this practice of trusting this. And sometimes, the self doesn't want to trust. I want to, this is important, this I just can't let go of. I've got to hang on to this, because conditioned phenomena can do that. It's very intimidating, very convincing, especially righteousness and principles and things like this. They're so right and so true, and must and should, and me and mine suddenly become, more important than trusting this, which doesn't seem like anything in terms of worldly values. So it's recognizable, it's knowing, but to recognize is awareness. It's this. And then as you recognize it, that's the insight into cessation, nirodha satya. Then the insight, there is cessation of conditions. And then the Bhatipata part, the second aspect of that noble truth is it should be realized. So that's the prescription, that's the Bhatipat part. Practice, it should be realized. Now what does that mean in terms of here and now, realized? It's reality. Keep trusting, referring, surrendering to it, listening, adoring it, respecting it. It's just, it doesn't seem like anything, but it's certainly recognizable, and the thinking mind will distrust it, put all kinds of doubts into your mind. So that's the vicikicca. When you start thinking about it, you'll just be caught in doubt. So that's like the third fetter, vicikicca, doubt. So and that's where these 3 fetters are so, useful references for, really examining, observing your the conditions that you're experiencing. So, like this is then stream entry, sotapanna, is having penetrated those 3 fetters. You've not destroyed them, you've not kind of, killed yourself off, but you recognize self. You discern it, you know what it is, and the results of attaching to it. There's a knowing, insight, knowledge. And you're aware of all the kind of assumptions that you've been making about the world and yourself, the cultural attitudes, the conventions, monastic conventions as well as cultural ones. So like clinging to monastic conventions with Sakyaditi, what happens? If we're monks and nuns out of Sakyaditi, and then then we grasp the conventions, and then we operate from our interpretation of those conventions. Or ideals, like culturally, modern culture in this country sees that these conventions are old-fashioned. Modern ideals are better, of gender equality and fairness and human rights and everything. These should dominate over the convention, because this Vinaya is an old-fashioned, ancient, made up by, and probably distorted and corrupted by monks over time, through corrupt monks. Then you get, wrong views, and Vinaya develops into a structure of exploitation and no longer useful. So we can criticize it, or we can just blindly attach to it. It has to be, but both, whether one's given with the other, if it's Sakya Ditti, what is the result of grasping the convention totally without, seeing the grasping, or looking at it from the critical mind, from one's personal reactions to restraint, to structures, to hierarchy, to the structure of Vinaya, how one personally, can be very critical, and we can see a lot of things we don't like about it. And we can also imagine how it should be. If we were perfect monastic community, monks and nuns equal in every way, living in perfect harmony, is, an ideal. It's a beautiful ideal, but it is that. It's not Dhamma. And so, like this tradition is, it's a traditional form. So it's about, and if you change it according to how you're feeling, or particular fashions of the time, or modern values, then it's no longer part of a tradition. It loses its potency. And the value of a tradition is that it has survived through so many, 2,500 years. And it's learning how to use this tradition, this Dhamma, this Vinaya, for liberation. That's the whole point of this community, is liberation. And that only you can do yourself, and we can't make anyone liberated. But these reflections are more or less encouraging you to use the tradition, and how it does affect you. I'm not trying, you have to have it, kind of love it in all its aspects, and blindly surrender, kind of passively resign yourself to Vinaya as some kind of, negative resignation to a convention. But it's using the convention to observe one's Sakya Ditti, how when one maybe gets very rigid, it has to be like this under all conditions. And anyone who doesn't do it like this is a shameless Alachi monk. So in Thailand, in Wat Pah Pong, they get into this, calling all the, you get very kind of, this is how it should be, and then monks that don't keep the Vinaya in the same way, we call them Alachi, which in Pali word for shameless. Well, observing how this affects consciousness, seeing myself as pure in Vinaya and someone else as Alachi, Is that wisdom, or is that self-view? Is that sakkaya ditthi? And so and then I can go the opposite stream. I don't want to be like those proud, arrogant monks that think they're better than the rest. And that's still the same thing. It's still sakkaya ditthi. So it's not about, trying to be generous and kind as an ideal, and compassionate and liberal and understanding as another form of sakkaya ditthi, but learning how to use the vinaya for awareness, liberation, rather than seeing it as personal kind of oppression. Now that takes awareness, because I've heard people criticize, they say the Buddha taught the Dhamma, but his ability to make rules was pathetic. So I've heard these monks, Western monks, not Thai, say this, that he was good at teaching the Dhamma, but as a rule maker he wasn't any good. The Vinaya is a waste of time. So I've heard this, because on Dhamma level, everything, doesn't matter. All conditions are impermanent and not self. It's true. Keeping the rules and the Sakya rules and the Bhajitya and Sanghadisesa and all this, it's just conditioned phenomena like anything else. But then the Buddha, before he died, said, I leave you Dhamma Vinaya. Now why didn't he just say, I leave you the Dhamma? Go forth and realize the truth. It was very inspiring. But also he put in this word Vinaya, which is convention. Now this is the convention that he left us to use for Dhamma. So we have if used properly, it works, because it really will awaken you to the subtleties of self-views, of emotional attachments, of assumptions we make about life and others and the world we live in. It gets to the source, because there's a part of us that doesn't like rules. There's a rebellious, a kind of arrogant conceit in human beings. Doesn't want to surrender, doesn't want to give up things, wants to get one's way, thinks we know better. I can see, I've seen this in myself, think I know better. And then listening to that in myself that says I know better than this Vinaya is like this. So then in the present moment, the robe, looking at the robe, and always the material robe that I wear helps. This part of the mindfulness is being aware of time and place and the convention that one is using. It's not about throwing it out anymore, but learning to recognize the kind of restraint on the action and speech level that I've committed myself to, surrendered to. So like those seeking vapacca upasampada, this is, to know what you're getting into and how to use the situation. Because we can come into the Sangha with, we usually come in full of sakkaya ditthi. Me and mine, and I want to become a monk, I want to be a nun, I want to live the holy life. I want, it can be very altruistic. I want to be free from all selfishness and want to help save all sentient beings. We could be bodhisattva, altruists. So it's not, it's not discriminating against that, but recognizing. So the anagarika, well, also the siladhara, samanera, and bhikkhu forms, these are for awareness, not for identity. They're conventions to be used to remind rather than conventions to be identified with. The Vinaya is a structure, conventional form, that we don't tamper with. We can adapt and change, in some ways, but the basic structure has to remain. Otherwise, it's no longer a tradition. It becomes something else. Becomes Ajahn Sumedhoism, or it becomes British Buddhism, or it becomes Amaravati Buddhism, modern Buddhism. Now there's plenty of opportunities for people to do those things. And now there's no authority to compel anyone to become Theravadan Buddhists or samanas. You're all free to go out and start your own cult if you want. There's nobody going to, prevent you from doing it. You can have your own form of Buddhism. And that's what many do. You've got all kinds of Buddhist variations, permutations on the Buddhist theme, just in England. So it's not like, where at one time, in England, if you were Roman Catholic, you got burned at the stake or beheaded. When they were under Henry VIII, where, you just, Roman Catholics were, persona non grata, and you didn't just tolerate them, you butchered them. So, but nowadays, there's nobody going to do that. You can be complete heretic. New Age Buddhism, based on the highest principles and ideals, and so that there's, it's nothing to say you have to do it this way, but this is a traditional form, and this is where, I'm making this emphasis because sometimes modern people don't understand the value of tradition. We tend to be critical of them, old-fashioned, dead, empty forms, Colonel Blimp. I think some of you think I'm a Colonel Blimp character. He's just out of touch with the times, that old guy up on a seat, just not with it. He doesn't, he's been a monk for so long and in a forest monastery, he hasn't been awake to the new feeling of the time. And because during the 60s, when all these, when I became a monk, feminism was not an issue. And I was, in Berkeley, California, which is where everything begins. And in the Peace Corps, my friend Donna, who really, is angry with me for not making you all equal in bhikkhunis. She wasn't like that before. And then, and so then she thinks, here, Sumedho's been lost in the forest monastery, doesn't know what's happening, poor old guy. And he's just trying to hang on probably out of male fear, probably it can't face his, these kind of fears of women or something. He's just so kind of conditioned by Thai forest tradition and male stubbornness and arrogance. But so this is you can look at me like that. That old British movie called Life and Death of Colonel Blimp. Maybe you're too young to remember that one. That was very good. English film about a British military man who I think he was modeled after Winston Churchill. From the old times when the British military, it had a purpose, had a nobility, had the honor, and the British officer, was an honorable gentleman of the highest order, and you had and all European warriors at that time had this gentleman's agreement. So even the First World War, there was a sense of honor, between German officers and British officers and French officers, and it was a kind of cultural thing of the warrior and the gentleman with the saber and all that, and then of course weapons, bombs, the whole changing of the war through World War I, World War II, and onward, where this kind of mentality doesn't work anymore. You go, the idea of a gentleman, colonel in the British Army would not be responsible for the slaughter of all these villagers in Pakistan or whatever. So, it is rather noble, and then that sense of nobility and unable to face the changes of modern warfare. Now the nobility, and this is what, so then we have to adapt to modern warfare, which means we have to make all kinds of moral compromises to be able to do it now, like torture, the Bush administration was, saying various forms of what we would call torture are not really torture. There's a kind of sophistry of because in modern warfare we were fighting the Al-Qaeda, which means that we can use any means to do that. And of course we don't believe in torture, but we believe in what? Intensive interrogation, or they have euphemisms for these, because tortured, anybody says they're for torture, they're doomed, isn't it? So you've got to call it something else. That doesn't sound so bad. And that's how we play games. We aren't aware of what actually is going on in our mind. How we can justify, what was once considered torture in the name of protecting the country. And then we vilify and demonize the opposite to the point where it's only the right thing to do. You can do anything you want with Osama bin Laden. He's a total devil. So, being humane, or anything or moral about it is not the issue. You should just destroy him. So there's a logic to that. But the awareness of this. So it's not trying to just hang on to tradition for tradition's sake, but using the tradition, this Dhamma, this Vinaya, for awakened awareness. Does it work for you? You have to find out for yourself. Can you use it? Is it helping you? Now, if you find you can't bear it, then look at that. I can't bear this. I can't stand this. It's like this. And if you really believe it, then go find some other place where that you can stand. But my encouragement is to really look at that. I can't stand this, because I've looked at this in myself, and an inner voice says, I can't stand this. But I can stand it, because that's awareness. At least I'm not, the protection we all have is the Vinaya. Living in a community where we have a high moral standard, in terms of speech and action. We can't, abuse or harm or destroy or each other. The Vinaya is about, moral agreements, restraint, forms of etiquette, of respect. Once we surrender to that and accept that, then we can really get down to the nitty-gritty of our own karma. The way we are, the resistance, the resentment, how this tradition, how this form affects our consciousness. That's where it really is important. Not to become a card-carrying Theravadan Buddhist. It's not asking you to wave a flag, but to use the structures for awakened attention, for discernment. So you can be free from suffering. Now, freedom from suffering is discerning. Like, through this awareness in the present, you can actually, begin to see suffering and non-suffering. Discern the difference. Discerning the difference. Suffering is like this, non-suffering is this. Now, non-suffering doesn't mean that I don't feel anything, or I don't have unpleasant mental states or physical ones. But there's a discerning of those. Trust in this awareness, in this stillness, this silence that sustains itself, constancy. If it sticketh to the constancy of the supernal mind, if it sticketh to the constancy, the continuity of the supernal mind that needs not move, it is superior to the necessity of fate. So the feeling, emotional feeling, physical sensation, sense experience, is the necessity of fate. It's the vipaka karma that we have in the present. It's like this. Now, if I really trust and relax and surrender into this supernal mind or this stillness, this is non-suffering. Even if, emotionally I'm still feeling something unpleasant. But I have to really trust it and because emotions are always pulling us out into making us believe our emotions are the priority. It's remembering this and determining to trust. Trust in this way is like real saddha in Pali. It's saddha with panya, wisdom. And then we don't make a problem around the conditions. So we can bear with the conditions that we might think, I can't bear it, it's not fair, I just cannot stand this, I've had enough, is like this. And that which is aware of, I've fed up, I've had enough, is not that way. So this is what I trust, not that voice that Sakya says, I've had enough, Phil, I'm fed up. I don't trust that, even though I'm still quite capable of thinking that. But I know it. It's not something I'm going to attach to and follow. So you're getting outside the condition, outside the gender issues, the ideals and all that. It's not like you're getting rid of them, but you're finding liberation from the limitation of identity, of ignorance, identity. The structures we're in, whether junior, senior, monk or nun, they're no longer ourselves anymore. They're merely expedient means, conventions. We no longer identify and see ourselves always in those terms. I'm junior to you, or I'm senior to you. Or it's no longer a problem because our refuge is in the supernal mind that needs not move, rather than in the sense of my reality is I'm a monk, I'm a nun, I'm junior, I'm senior, I'm a Mahatera, I'm an Ajahn, I'm not an Ajahn, I'm only a junior monk, I'm a mere anagarika, that kind of thing. And we could create enormous amount of suffering around these identities. They're not meant to be the causes of, to make us suffer. They're for convenience, expediency only. And then our moral position towards each other is honorable. So if you feel like the Bhikkhu Sangha is, senior to the Siladhara Sangha, and that the Siladharas can be exploited, manipulated by unscrupulous bhikkhus, it's impossible. That's how it might feel sometimes. But, we have this Vinaya, which is about moral agreements, non-exploitation. But if you do feel, you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation, look at that. Not saying there's anything wrong in feeling that, but that's something to observe. That which is aware of doubt or anxiety about your position is like this. And then you begin to see it, discern it as a condition rather than suppressing it or believing it. So this is invitation to really get to the causes of suffering. And to let go of the causes, to realize the deathless, the unborn, uncreated, unconditioned. Then there's nothing to fear. That's fearlessness. Death is no longer frightening, physical death. One can bear with the vicissitudes of life, with the unpredictable contingencies of nature, with the comings and goings, changings of conditioned phenomena.